Well, welcome everyone. Thanks for showing up, whether you're catching this video live or watching the recording. It's really great to be here with you. My name's Michelle.
And I'm Natalie, and welcome to an introduction to shadows. Yeah, so Michelle, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do in the world.
Oh, wonderful. Who am I and what I do in the world? Well, in relation to shadow work and what it is that brought me to this point, my background is in community development, particularly in mental health and wellness. And one of the things that I learned and discovered for myself was the overlays and complexity of what it is to discover oneself. And for me, there was something in the psyche, something about the spiritual component of healing that was not present in mainstream institutional healthcare and wellness. And in my own health journey, I began to get very curious and wonder about the mysteries. What else is there? What is beyond that which we can see, and how can we tap into those resources and that innate wisdom to learn how to come back into our own alignment and our own wellness. And meeting you, Natalie, and beginning the work within the mysteries, within the realms of priestesshood and dreaming, and coming into the work of shadows and learning about that and the ways in which it works our psyche and the stories we tell ourselves and how that impacts the way that we show up in the world. It was like a crack in the glass where I could see the light through the dark in a whole new way. And so my wish, my prayer, the work that I do in the world is, how do I support people to see things that we have maybe been conditioned not to see? And as I look out the window, I'm seeing a beautiful hummingbird actually right now. It's a great gift. And so that's my work, is to be curious and to support other people in becoming curious about who they are and what their operating system in the world is, and how they can be empowered to shift that if it's not working for them, and to come into a place of wholeness. How about you, Natalie?
Lovely. Wow. Okay. Well, on the tail end of that, I started off my career in engineering. I used to be in the oil and gas industry, and soon realized that it was very disempowering to in the realm of health. Like, health and well-being just wasn't a part of the science and the structure of our society, and that didn't quite work for me. And so I started exploring, right as I entered into motherhood. I also entered into what more is there from my own existence. And so to really explore the holistic healing modalities, all kinds of different healing methods and techniques and practices. And it wasn't until I stepped into the mysteries and beyond the veil that exists between worlds, that I realized that that's my work in the world, that being a bridge between one reality and another reality. And what does it mean to step over that bridge, and what kind of tools do we need to learn in order to be able to bridge realities, especially when our reality is one that's riddled with pain and stories of suffering. And so a lot of the work that I do is in the mysteries, and meaning the ancient esoteric teachings that have been around for millennia, that kind of have been hidden from plain sight, and excavating those. I've been an avid learner of them for 20 years. And then learned about shadow work, and realized that was like, if there were bricks and mortar to build a bridge, that shadow work was one of the kinds of mortar that would build that bridge. And so I fell in love with it and haven't looked back. I also facilitate fire walking, and I have a mystery school specifically designed for women and women's mysteries. And yeah, just really excited to be talking about this any chance I possibly get. So here we are. This is who we are.
Wonderful. Thanks, Natalie.
Yeah.
And that's a great bridge into what you can expect in this 60-minute video. What our intention is for this time together is to, like we just did, let you know a little bit more about who we are, why we're here. And when we talk about shadow work, what is it that we mean, and how do we proceed in facilitating the practices that we offer? And spoiler alert for those who don't want to watch the full 60 minutes, but maybe want to scan through the recording. At the end of this video, we are going to be talking about our 5-month program that we have starting in November, with a small gift to those of you who are interested to join us.
So what are shadows? Shadows are a bit of a buzzword right now, and a lot of people are talking about, what are they? And the term shadows comes, I think it was initially really brought into our collective consciousness by Carl Jung, and it refers to the unexpressed or repressed or hidden aspects of self, mainly the parts that are hidden from us, and also the parts that we keep hidden from others, so that we maybe carry shame around, or some fear around letting others see those parts of us. So it's the unrepressed, or it's the repressed, unseen, hidden aspects of self. That's what shadows are. And how do we know when something is in shadow, and do we even have them? Well, I think if we're in a human body, I think it's safe to say we all have some repressed parts of self. The way that shadows are formed is that when we come into physical form as a baby, there's this, if you can imagine, like a 360-degree, a full sphere of human expression is available to us. And if you just think of a baby, if you've ever been in the presence of one, there's no filter, right? They cry when they're sad or afraid or hungry. They scream when they need to scream. They smile when there's a smile that comes from them. They fart, they pee, they poop, whatever it is. There's no filter. It just happens. And then what happens is, as we get a little bit older, and our family of origin determines what is acceptable and not acceptable. So example, being angry might not be acceptable. So don't be angry. Come back when you're not angry anymore. All of these things that we're told as young children. And then we take that part of self. So maybe the part that was, really rebellious, or, that got angry at people, or was frustrated or resentful or whatever. And we put it into shadow. Because in order to belong and to be accepted within our culture and our family of origin, we need to fit in somehow. Those are basic attachment programs and imprints in us, right? To fit in, to belong. And so then, as we grow up, more and more and more and more gets shoved into that bag of shadows, until we reach a point where maybe in our adulthood, we maybe something in us that would support our full expression in the world, such as having free expression of voice, maybe something that naturally you want to say, and yet part of you stops you from saying it. And so then you realize in adulthood, wow, why is it that I have these like blockages to the kind of life that I want? And in general, all of that is linked to what's been repressed, and the imprints and the programs from childhood.
And the more that we begin to do this work, and one of the gifts that these practices, in this particular way that we work with shadows, what it offers us is an opportunity to become very curious, to begin to look at within our own psyche, what are the pieces of us that we have forgotten or hidden or rejected so deeply that we actually don't even realize that they're part of us anymore. Sometimes it's very clear. We know our shadows, and what it is more about how do we get to know them? How do we build that relationship? And when we look at our psyche, and we look at the different types of who we are, as humans, we are complex beings. And when we begin to get curious about what our own operating system is, what are the experiences we've had in our life? And how did that consciously and subconsciously program us to respond or react or engage with ourselves, the world, and others in a particular way? And these practices are opportunities that have a beginning, a middle, and an end to work pieces of that, to find some understanding of where you're operating from, so that you can become empowered to make choices differently, if that's what you choose to do. If it's that your operating system is no longer serving you and it's impacting your relationships or your health, these practices are ways in which you can get curious about that in a container that asks you to be a little bit vulnerable and brave, and to be with your community in these practices that can have a direct impact on your operating system in your subconscious and conscious mind.
Mhm. Yeah, and we don't always, when we think of shadows, it isn't necessarily the dark or the, what we would judge as maybe being the negative emotions like resentment, jealousy, anger, fear. Oftentimes we'll put our goodness and our bigness and our light and our capacity for greatness into shadow because somebody told us we were too much. Or it wasn't good to be too big or to be too loud or to be seen or da, 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 da. And so then we get into, and we reach that point where those imprints aren't working anymore, and our life has some recurring patterns that create struggle, and often we'll realize that maybe the belief that there's something really good and beautiful to come from my life, maybe that has been put into shadow, or maybe the belief that there's a purpose for this existence of mine, maybe that's been put into shadow. Right. And so we look at that 360-degree sphere and we start pulling out, going back to the full expression of what it means to be human every time we transform one of those shadow aspects of self. It essentially is about empowerment, about becoming more and more and more of who we really are at our essence, at our core. That is the premise between or in this realm of shadow work. And there's some real misconceptions around shadow work. I hear a lot of people, say to me, "Oh, but I've been doing shadow work for the last year." And my curiosity around is, what have you been doing for a year that it's taken that long to transform some of these aspects of self? Mm-hmm. So the lineage of shadow work is a lineage that's very concrete in the practices and the capacity to shift and transform some of these energetics is actually fairly fast and impactful when we do it in this way. And you go in and you go through a process that then shifts something in the psyche, and then it isn't the same again. And so we don't actually spend a lot of time in these darker emotions or in these emotions that maybe we've repressed, because once we know how to shift them, then they're no longer vying for our attention. Then they don't take all of this life force energy in order to keep feeling. We actually have transformed them into something new, a new enlightened part of self.
Yeah. One of the misconceptions is that to do shadow work means that we dive into the shadow realm and we almost stay there. Mm-hmm. And yet in life, in this particular planet, right, there's a balance of all things. And so when we're doing the work, it isn't to go into those dark places and stay there. It's mm-hmm. to go in with a flashlight and illuminate what has been there all along, and to remove some of those cobwebs so that we can see ourselves from a particular perspective mm-hmm. and work that. The imagery that I had when you were talking, Nathalie, was like when we work the soil, when you work clay, mm-hmm. you don't just hold the clay, you don't just sit in the dirt, mm-hmm. you're working it to say, what is here, what is viable, and how do we work this particular quality so that something else can grow of it? What was meant to be grown from here? How do we move into that place of creation and expansion, which includes life and death? There's a whole spectrum of things that I won't talk about in this video, but it's that idea of to work something means to tend to it in a way where perhaps on the other side something else is possible, because the way that it was before wasn't working. Because if it was, then what work is there to be done? Mm-hmm. And so if you're listening to this and maybe you're wondering, oh my goodness, I have so many shadows and they're all bad, or I have no shadows and that's good. Mm-hmm. Remove the whole context of good or bad. Mm-hmm. When we do shadow work, we're coming from the perspective of everything is neutral in the way that it is welcome here. And there's space for us to tend to that and the way that it's having an impact in your life. Mm-hmm. And so to come in and maybe to become curious about anything that has to do with should. If you're in an interaction or an experience and it's like, well, I should respond this way, or I need to be the nice one, or I can't be the mean one, or if I use my voice, I'm this. When we begin to look at the beliefs and the stories about who we are and how we show up into the world, perhaps the next curiosity is, So where did that come from?
Mhm.
And then is that serving me? And then might shadow work be a process and an experience that can help you work that into something else?
Mhm. Yeah, and I think I'll add, one way to recognize if something is in shadow, because I've had a lot of people ask that, like, how do I know when something's in shadow? Well, when there's an intense reaction to something, you can pretty much be guaranteed that there's some imprint in your psyche that then is judging this situation, that then is creating a whole story about your current situation, that then creates suffering. So when there's an intensity of reaction that you might not have some understanding around, or don't know where it comes, or you want to blame it on somebody else for having created that in you, there's likely something in shadow that is wanting to get your attention, or maybe coming to the surface to be like processed, or maybe it's time to work that piece of work in your life right now. And oftentimes we have that intensity of reaction as a mirror towards somebody else. So we'll look at someone and we'll go, oh my God, I would never be that. Never in a million years would I do that. Well, then one of the things we say in shadow work, then likely you have that in shadow. Whatever it is that you would never be is in shadow in you, which means it's operating somehow subconsciously. It might not look the same as what that other person is doing. And there's something operating beneath the surface that's creating that intensity of emotion that then is mirrored in another person. So the more we react to someone else's behavior, the clearer the indication of something that's repressed within the self. And that is, honestly, that's hard to look at. Those are some of the hardest things to reflect back, hold a mirror up and go, wow, do I have that too? And when we do, the more that we do that, the more compassion, understanding, and acceptance we have for our fellow humans, because I can look at them and go, yeah, I've got that too. And I understand where you're coming from. So that's part of what's really powerful about doing this kind of work.
And one of the pieces I really love about this particular work is, and I mentioned it earlier, that piece of a process has a beginning and a middle and an end. And that doesn't mean that you come in and you do a process and like, oh my gosh, everything's different. That's possible. And what it means is you've completed one cycle. If emotions is energy in motion, if there's this piece of our lived experience that is still operating in our psyche on a conscious and subconscious level, when we do these processes, it allows us to work that from a place of into a place of completion, even if it's just that first layer, and then the next layer, and then the next layer. And what I love about these processes is it also allows us to build a community and a collective of people who have an agreement to talk about the shadows and the parts of self that we put into repression. So we don't have to hide who we are from each other, and we have an agreement about the judgments that we hold and how we then look at our own operating system. I love how these processes, they allow us to develop a shared language. When we even just to say the word shadow, after you've watched this recording, you'll have a better understanding of what we mean when we're talking about that. And when we come together, we continue to build a vocabulary and a language where we can relate to each other in a particular way that perhaps other people can't. And what I really love about this is the map. And we're going to talk about the map in a moment, because there is a map that can be overlaid in our experiences to help us orient and navigate our way. Again, when Nathalie was talking about how sometimes to do shadow work, it's not about just going into the darkness and staying there for a long time. And anytime we go into a new place, a new landscape, sure, we can just walk around and explore, and we learn our way, and it's a beautiful way to explore the world. And when we're given a map, we can choose, here are some options. How do we want to navigate this experience? Are we trying to tend to something in a particular way? And can this be applied to just make it a little bit more easeful? And that's what I really enjoy about this, is that it's a map that I can use when I'm in a particular mind frame or space and whoa, I'm going for a swirl here. Where am I on this map? How do I orient myself to what might be happening in the realm of my own internal psyche, so that I can just be curious with a compass. And so, Nathalie, I'd love to hand it over to you just to talk a little bit about the map that we use in shadow work.
Yeah, and I like that concept of a map as well. You see a lot of really great models that have been around for millennia. You know, there's 5-quadrant models in traditional Chinese medicine. There's 4-quadrant models in indigenous teachings in terms of a medicine wheel, and these like it's like, so we have, like I talked about, that 360-degree version of self, right? And it's like, how do we orient ourselves within that? What are some of the commonalities that, you know, that humans, regardless of our culture of origin, share? What are some of the common patterns that we share? And you know, Carl Jung has taught, and Joseph Campbell and many others have talked about this concept of archetypes, of there being archetypal forces that exist in the human psyche that throughout time and space have been similar, and cultures have been similar. You know, we hear of the hero archetype, and how that whole hero's journey, and how, you know, almost every culture in the world has some version of what it means to go out and go through a rite of passage and come back transformed, right? That would be the hero's journey. And so in this particular map, in this system, in this lineage, it's a 4-quadrant model. And those quadrants are, the energetics of those quadrants, or archetypes we call them, are the lover, the warrior, the magician, and the sovereign. And when put together as a whole, represent 4 of the basic archetypal energies that, when in balance, make for an empowered human existence. So there's like opposing forces, and what does it mean to be in balance with all 4 of these archetypes? And so we're gonna talk a little bit about them. This isn't an in-depth exploration of them. There's a lot of overlays and qualities to each one of these, and we're going to give you a little bit of an introduction to them, so that if you choose to come and do some work with us in the future, you'll have an idea of what we're talking about when we mention these.
And as we go about, just listen and begin to get curious. Is there something in the way that we're introducing these archetypes to you? Is there a framework or something within the language that we use where you can begin to see that part of yourself? And begin to then, whether we see you again or ever or not, what is it for this information to now be in your consciousness, and to begin to track those parts of yourself, so that you begin to get to know how those archetypes are present in your experience, and to notice, oh, that's when this part of me shows up, or this, when I'm in this kind of an experience, this part of me shows up. And so I don't know if you're a note taker, but if you are, this might be a fun time to take a few, and if not, just let the information come in and land however it does.
Yeah, and start to notice, like Michelle said, how this plays out for you in your own life already. And you'll see as we go through the 4 of them, that there will be some of them, one of them possibly, that's really familiar to you, that you'll be like, oh, that's how I operate 90% of the time. And there will be another or a couple others that are maybe less familiar or completely unfamiliar, because it possibly has been put into shadow based on your family of origin and your origin story. All right, so we're going to start with the lover. And the lover quadrant is the emotional realm. That is, you know, in this model, we're going to overlay directions with it. And so it would start in the east, and it would face kind of the new dawn. And in our own story of evolution, it would be the infant stage where the lover is born in us. So if you recall what I said earlier about connection and attachment, and how bonding is so necessary for life, actually. In order to sustain life in any way, we need to know that we are bonded to another, attached to another. And so that is the lover archetype. It's our capacity to connect with ourselves, with the world around us, with loved ones, with a sense of purpose, with anything. It's like those strings of connection and attachment that come from us. And that happens in the emotional realm. And we say, you know, when we talk about the lover quadrant, the doorway into connection is through vulnerability and grief. That when we, you know, oftentimes when we have an experience of feeling really vulnerable, or we're grieving the loss of something or someone in our lives, there's like this need to connect with others. We see this often at like memorials when we're all grieving the loss of a person, and all of a sudden there's this sense of like, wow, how do I belong and fit into this collective, this constellation that's gathered here together? What is my part in this? Who are my loved ones here? And connection and like longing for it comes forward from that place of loss. Not to say that that is the only way that we feel connection. And if you're feeling disconnected or not connected to people, then the invitation then would be to look at how vulnerable do you allow yourself to be in relation to another. That is how we step closer towards connection. It isn't with like harshness and boundaries and separation. It's with vulnerability and like needs and being able to communicate that to another.
Yeah, for me, the lover, it's that part of me that's in my heart space. It's that inner child, the one who is, like Nathalie mentioned, who is looking and seeking for connection. And I can notice when it almost feels like I have a bleeding heart at times. And it's like, oh, when I'm operating from this place, is that from a place of wounding and lack? Or is this from a place of feeling true, honest, authentic connection? And to notice the times in my life where my heart is open and when it begins to close. And how do I show up in the world based on that? And what stories am I telling myself about how I show up in relationship, and how others show up in relationship to me, and what I need, what I think I need, or what I think other people need. And one of the things I find so helpful that Nathalie also taught me and talked about is that each of these quadrants, you can have them like really quiet so that you almost can't hear them at all, and then they can be turned up really, really loud. So there's variations on that scale in terms of how these particular archetypes are impacting you or showing up based on what you lived and experienced in your past.
And yeah, what that might look like is if that particular quadrant is really quiet or turned right down, there might be this disconnect from your emotional body. You might be like, wow, I don't feel anything from the neck down, or I actually am not having an emotional reaction to, or I don't feel anything. Like if that is part of your experience, then there might be like an opportunity to connect more into your lover inner self in order to begin to feel all of what's going on in your emotional body. Where it might be turned up high might be when I have all of these needs, and I think somebody else needs to fulfill all of those needs, and we get into codependency of like, I don't exist apart from you. If you're not here fulfilling those needs, then I will die. Like I feel like I will die. So there's this sense then of like dependence on another to fulfill one's internal needs. And that's where, addictions also fall into this realm. It's like, then I'm dependent on a substance perhaps, or a digital experience or whatever, in order to fulfill a need that I don't think I can fulfill within myself. So where we would tune it to a place of balance within the self is recognizing what my needs are, and then learning how to actually tend to that little one on the inside of like, wow, I have a little one right now who's feeling really afraid. Okay, I can look after that within myself, and then I can show up in a balanced way in relation to another. So I don't need that person to fulfill a need, and I can definitely openly be vulnerable and express those needs to another. So that would be the balanced expression of the lover.
And so some of the stories that might show up is I'm unlovable, I'm unworthy of love, or I don't love in the right way. I can't receive love. These are some of maybe the stories or the statements that are perhaps familiar in your psyche that would be connected to shadows that fall into the archetype and the quadrant of the lover.
All right, so that's the first of the four archetypes. The second one, if you can imagine, we start in the east, Actually, I'll do it like, we'll start in the east and we're going to go around the wheel like this. So we're going to move into the south. And the south direction is the place of the warrior energy in this particular model. And the warrior has to do with identity and territory and communication and boundaries. This is the place, if you can imagine like an infant moving into the toddler years, and the toddler begins to say no, or yes, or I want, or this is what I want, or, you know, all of those things, those declarations of self. That is where the warrior is born in us, where we start to get a sense of self. For myself now, maybe it isn't, I don't need to be super connected to my caregivers anymore all of the time, where I'm pushing them away. And I can start to feel there's me and there's you, and we are separate, right? That naturally needs to take place in our human existence so that we can separate from our family of origin, go out into the world and be independent, contributing members of society. And so the warrior is necessary in order to do that. And so how this impacts us in adulthood is this sense of identity and knowing who I am. Then it makes it possible for me to say no to certain things and yes to certain things. So if something doesn't feel good in my body, I don't like somebody else's behavior, I don't like what they just did or what they just said, or, you know, how they've stepped into my physical space or whatever that is, then it's the warrior in me that can say, get out of my physical space, or can say no to something that just doesn't feel good in my body right now, that I can walk away from something really cleanly. I can be like, this doesn't work, so I'm leaving. Maybe it's a toxic job environment, and I mean, and it's the warrior in me that first of all can recognize toxicity and go, wait a minute, do I deserve this? No, I probably don't. I think I deserve better than this. And then the third one would be, wow, what might it be like to just walk out the door and step away from something that is toxic? So that's warrior energy in the human experience. And how that might show up is, you know, in that turn down low might be if you have a hard time with boundaries, setting boundaries, stating them, and then enforcing them. There's that, you know, there's 3 stages to that. And then maybe even walking away if someone doesn't respect those boundaries, right? There's maybe enforced steps to boundaries. And being able to communicate it. So the whole throat chakra and what happens when there's a sensation in the body and then it comes out verbally, that is a process of warrior energy. And also with that comes the capacity to say yes to your dreams, yes to the life that you do want and do deserve, as that sense of self has been solidified, and there's some, you know, concrete knowledge about who you are in the world and what you're willing to stand for, not stand for.
One of the things I find so interesting with the warrior quadrant is the misconceptions related to this, and this piece of, to be a strong warrior, I need to yell and fight and use my voice all the time, and I have to push people away, and to get into that space of aggression. So sometimes when this warrior quadrant is turned up too loud, perhaps your boundaries as a young person were crossed, or you had felt and been taken advantage of, and there is this part in you that comes online and is always in fight mode. That is also another example of perhaps where the warrior is turned up too much. On a very simple daily basics kind of perspective, I think of the warrior as well. Nathalie spoke to how the lover is the emotional body. It's a lot of the heart space. And for the warrior, it's our physical vessel. It's our body. Do you go to the bathroom when you need to go? Do you drink water when you're thirsty? Do you eat healthy foods for yourself? Do you allow and welcome people into your physical space, but know where that boundary, like, yes, I want to hug. No, I don't want to hug. Do you have a practice of discernment to distinguish what is it that your physical body actually needs, and how do you tend to this territory? And then how do you tend to your physical territory in terms of your house space or your office space? and what you let in and what you allow to move out. So there's so many different ways that the concepts of this particular quadrant of the wheel are at play all of the time. And I find that for me, this was one where it took me a lot of time to learn, what does a balanced warrior look like in my space? It was, there's one piece of, if it's been either too loud or too quiet, that we go to the complete opposite side and say we've done the work. And yet, how do we begin to mold that, to continue to work that into something that is functional and supportive of harmony in our life, within our own self and psyche, and our relationships with other. I find that sometimes the warrior, one of the ways in which it can come into play as well, is noticing my self-talk even, and noticing like, oh, are those thoughts that I want to have in here? And can I hold a boundary with myself in terms of, you're not welcome here? And how can I call on this particular archetype in a variety of ways? And it is one where I have pent up anger that might be coming from my solar plexus, and the default that I've learned is, well, if I can't be angry, then I'll default to sad. So let me work that programming and say anger is welcome here too, and it can be constructive. It doesn't need to be destructive. It can be constructive. And how do I get this energy building in my solar plexus out in a way that doesn't cause harm or damage? Because if I don't, then what will the unintended consequences of it be? Because the energy is not going to go away. It's energy that's asking to be moved. And the risk is perhaps it comes out in a way that I wasn't conscious of, and perhaps it causes an impact or consequence on myself or other people that could have been different.
Yeah, well said. So how this might show up in like a relationship, for example, would be like a healthy, if there's, two within a relationship who both have some balanced warrior energy, then there wouldn't be this, there'd be a natural separation that takes place of like, maybe I have my own space, or my partner has their own space, or we spend time apart, or we work in different spaces, or whatever that is. There'd be a natural separation without the need or the yearning or the stories of, we must not be connected if we're separate right now. So there's security in separation. So I know that if I go away and do my own thing, and my partner goes away, does his or her own thing, then we can come back together again and not feel like the other one has like let us down in some way, or has betrayed us in some way. Or so healthy separation and sense of self within any of our relationships, not only our intimate loved ones. So all of that is warrior, territory, sense of self, identity, boundaries. That's warrior energy. All right, so we're shifting into the West, which is the place of the magician in the shadow work model. And the magician, if we went, the lover was the emotional body, the warrior was the physical body, and the magician would be the mental body. And the magician is our capacity to step back and to step way back, to look from afar at what's going on in our world and observe it in a detached way. Like, what is really happening? Can I analyze this? Can I give it some thought? Can I see the other options that are available to me? And then from that, like really objective, so it's objectivity. It's from that objective place, make some new and conscious decisions for my life right now. And so, there's a little bit of a misnomer especially in the holistic world, that you need to get in your body, be in your body, feel. Oh, hi, we're making a recording. Okay.
We got a gift.
Oh, that was a gift from my father. Lovely. So there is a misconception in the holistic world that we need to feel in order to heal, yes, and that is better to feel than to think about it. And from a balanced model perspective, there's a time and a place for all of it. So there's a gift in feeling it, and there's a gift in detaching from it. And it's in that detachment that then the objectivity comes in, that maybe then, it's only when I'm detached from a situation that I can see maybe where it's been really toxic, where it isn't serving me, where it isn't serving the greater whole by continuing on in this way. If I'm really connected to those around me and I'm not seeing objectively, then I might not see where it's unhealthy. So it's our magician self, that capacity within the self to see objectively, that then helps us get a different vantage point, a different perspective, to then make a new choice for myself that's more conducive to my life's work and my path.
Yeah, this quadrant, I mean, I find every quadrant fascinating, so you'll hear me say it every time. And what I love about this one, it's like that zoom in and zoom out effect. It's the metaphor right now, the visualization I'm getting is like a puzzle. And you're in and you're looking at all of these pieces so closely. And sometimes that's what helps you put them together. And then you're looking at them all and they look exactly the same. And you don't even know what the picture of the puzzle is anymore. So how do you just zoom back and look at everything you have from a place of not being attached, not like, oh my God, I suck, I'm never going to finish the puzzle, or I'm going to throw this puzzle out because it's crazy, right? The lover or the worry, but to say, there is a larger picture here and I was too close to see it. So how do I remove myself from the center of that so I can be a little bit more objective and look at it and then begin to put the pieces back together? And it is absolutely not about bypassing. It's absolutely not about bypassing. But when we look at that pendulum and we look at the history of the world and how we perhaps for quite some time been in this very intellectual state of reason and rationalization. And so then it swung over to like, feel your feelings all the time to create some of that balance. And now it's, so what does balance actually look like? What is it to consider our heart space, our power space, and our mind space? What is it to work from all of these different spheres so that we can begin to understand? And that's what the magician does. It's this beautiful place where we can be in an experience and say, wait a minute, I'm not only my feelings, and I'm not only the sensations in my body, and I'm not only the voices in my head. So how do I even separate myself into that wise mind space so that I can look at what part of me is the one who's feeding those thoughts? Are they here to protect me? At what time did I establish this particular way of being in the world? And what was the purpose? And does that purpose still serve? Or if I'm in this relationship and there's conflict or something that's going on, why is that here? What is actually beneath the words that we're saying and the things that we're tossing back and forth? Can we separate ourselves enough to see that and then choose how to proceed? So this particular one, I think I have a pretty strong magician, and so I'm learning consistently, how do I operate from this place in a way that's balanced? Because perhaps it might end up looking, if it's not balanced, that it is going into this place of like solving things or going straight into solutions or orchestrating things in a particular way that is where we might not be aware of what our rationale or motives are. And so I love all of them, and this is just happens to be the one we're talking about.
Right. And another way that might show up if it's turned low might be in a space of confusion, fog, non-clarity, not like I don't know where I'm going right now, I don't know what path to take. If you've ever felt like you don't have a choice, you know, I've heard a lot of people say that, especially in the last few years, like I had no choice. And from a balanced shadow perspective, you always have choice. You just didn't access that part of you that could see far enough to see there's another choice to make it. It might not, you know, there might be a sacrifice in those choices or whatever, but there's always a choice. We just need to be able to detach enough to see what that is. And also where it might be turned up really high might be in like I'm only going to stay in my head. I'm going to analyze everything. I actually have maybe I don't even put any value on emotions, and maybe I don't for others as well. Like if people are feeling emotional, I might have all kinds of judgments about that. Like, oh my God, I'm just crying again. You know, because I might have high value attached to analyzing and figuring things out. So that might be where it's turned really high. And where it can come into that space of balance is when do I need to analyze and be objective about this? And can I do that in a way that detaches from others? And when can I then let go of that so that I can feel what's going on in my body, or be empathetic to what's going on in somebody else's body? So it's this like balanced place of like out and back in again. That's our magician capacity, and there's skill in that, and there's a necessity for that at certain points in our life, maybe even on the daily. Okay, so we're going to move from magician into the last of the 4 quadrants in the north, which is the sovereign energy. And so now, we've started with a baby and the lover, feeling connected to all of life, moved into a sense of identity, sense of self. And then when we get into our teenage years, maybe we start to analyze things, and discernment comes in place. Like, I don't maybe want to be friends with that person, or maybe I don't like that school anymore. Or discernment starts to take place. And then we move into like early adult years, where we start to think of a future. Who am I going to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now? What's important for me as I move forward in my life? Do I have a vision for my future? Can I imagine myself living the kind of life that I want to live? So it's our visionary self, our capacity to look to the future and go, this is where I'm going, and I deserve this. I'm worthy of having this in my life because I've done the other work in order to have a good sense of self, feel connected to the world, be a little bit objective, and know that I have choices. And now, what is the vision for my future? And also, the balanced sovereign energy in each of us I can look at myself and I can bless my own existence. I can be like, I believe in myself, and I believe that I'm worthy of having a life that brings me joy, that brings me fulfillment, that has a real purpose to it. Like, I believe that, I know that about myself. And I can also believe that about others around me too. So I can look at others who are in my world and wish the highest for them, and maybe even be a part of inspiring the highest version of them to come to fruition in their own life.
So in this map, when we look at the lover is the emotional body, and the warrior is the physical body, and the magician is the mental body. The sovereign is that spiritual body. It's that soul connection. It's the connection to divine, to universe, to that part of us where we truly know in our whole being who we are. And it's this way in which we can begin to make our decisions from that place. And what I love to do to stir the pot by the time we get to this quadrant, right? Because there's this beautiful map and this lovely journey, and it provides a sense of completion when we work all of those parts. And then once we reach that part, what we realize is that all of these parts of self are interacting with each other in an absolutely nonlinear way all the time. And then we can begin to take that map that maybe looked a little bit like more 2-dimensional or 3-dimensional, and then we can flip it, and then we can turn it, and we can begin to move ourselves with it as though this map is a living thing, and begin to see the ways in which these parts of self are operating with one another. And how does that then play out? And so it's this incredible, almost never ending sphere and crystal ball of possibilities to learn about the human psyche and your psyche. For me, it's my psyche, and it will look different for all of us, because the magic and the medicine and the essence of who we are, although there's pieces of similarity that can be reflected, we're unique. And we're sovereign beings in the world. And so how do we use this as an opportunity to look at ourselves and learn about ourselves? And I can feel my body, like there's a swirling that happens in the reconfiguration when I lean in and touch like what is possible through this work. And so that is the invitation of, well, it's the introduction to the map and the invitation of are you ready to lean in? Are you curious and willing to put in the effort and the energy and the resources so that this can become something that benefits you in your life in general?
And we have different ways for you to get involved and to learn these practices and these, we're going to do, this was the theory part of it, and then we're going to get into the experience part of it, so that it becomes a visceral knowing within the self. And then you also have the tools that when the next layer is peeled away and the next shadow reveals itself, that you'll have some idea on how to work through that yourself. And so, we've devised some shadow clinics to start to have some experiential processes of like feeling into these 4 archetypes. What does each one feel like? How might it show up in our own lives? And how can we start to work with it? So those are the shadow clinics. There's one in August and one in September. And then we've created a shadow intensive, which is a 5-month journey, where each month, it starts in November, and each month there will be a 6-hour day where we'll do process work in each one of the 4 archetypes, and then bring them all together at the very end. And plus, in between that, there'll be access to some group work in an online forum, that then you can continue to share these stories and processes with others, and see how these archetypes are actually influencing and working in your life.
Yeah, and the clinics are a very low risk, high reward opportunity to come. It's like a clinic, right? It's like, oh, there's one particular thing that I'm going to work on. And I'm going to come and I'm going to participate in that piece of work, and I'm going to allow that part to integrate or to heal. And then the intensive is like, let's do a holistic program together. Let's really be in this together. Let's explore the different pieces, the different archetypes. Let's do multiple pieces of work and begin to see how they overlap, how they integrate. And to work the stories as they come up. So that 5-month intensive, like Nathalie said, we'll meet once a month, every month for 5 months. And we'll be in an online container together, where we can begin to actually apply the vocabulary that we're learning together, to talk about it and relate to one another, and to receive feedback and look at similarities and ways in which this is operating and taking form in our lives. Nathalie and I will be there to offer feedback and perspective and small exercises or journal prompts and different processes along the way that can help you move some of that energy and integrate it over the long run. And so it's a really incredible opportunity and experience to get to know this work, to get to know yourself, and to work in that realm of shadow, so that every single one of these quadrants that exist within you get to have your attention, where it's like, yay, I get to be seen. We're literally taking those parts out of the shadows and putting them in the center of the room with a flashlight and illuminating it so that it can be seen for what it is, and be valued for what it has to offer you in terms of transformation and healing and change, and what is possible when we look at these parts of ourselves.
And for those of you who are watching this recording, we have a 10% discount if you sign up for the Shadow Intensive within the next 24 hours. Then you will receive that as a gift from us. And I would also like to include that along with these programs, both Michelle and I have an individual one-on-one practice with people, and we both offer different services and modalities that can then support the continued work in these realms, and anything else that might be standing in your way. So do reach out if you want to explore shadows, if you want to learn about this model, grow in this particular way that we've been talking about here, or otherwise want to connect with us.
Wonderful. And I recognize that there's this fun thing, because this is a recording, and so based on when you watch this recording, that 24-hour window is going to shift, and that's okay. The reason that we're including it in this video is because if you've watched this full 60 minutes, there's something in you that is already demonstrating a level of investment. I'm curious enough to put in the time. And so we want to honor that and support you in choice, in commitment, because when we do this work, commitment is important. I'm in. I'm going to see it all the way through. And when we say yes to something, when we show up with that level of commitment, there's like this piece in our soul contract that is in agreement to saying yes, and I am here fully, and I am here present. And so that discount is honored, regardless of when you watch this, unless the program's already started, because it will be a closed container. It's an all in for the intensive. I'm a yes for the 5 months to do every quadrant of the wheel together. And so for the recording, we'll have some written information below. And again, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, reach out to either of us. It will be a pleasure to work with you in the shadow realm.
Yes. Thank you for going on this journey with us. Bye.